Hey everyone, and welcome back. In my last video I asked y'all if you'd be interested in a video on my process for building and creating for my save. Several of you said that you'd like to see it, so that's what we're doing today. But before we get started, keep in mind this process does vary based on my inspiration, familiarity with the real-world influences, and creativity. This is just a general look at my process rather than a set in stone type of thing. Also, this will mostly be a talking video rather than actually showing. I may do a mini-series at a later time with a more in-depth look, but for now, I don't really have a lot to show. While I'm talking, you can watch me finish a lot in Chestnut Ridge, and if there's time, create a sim of one of the households, both of which will be in the save. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about my process. We start where most things do, at the beginning. From the moment a pack is announced, I begin trying to get as much information as possible. For one, to make sure it's a pack that I actually want to add to my collection, and for two, to get a general idea of what features we can expect. I'm sure everyone else does this as well. I watch the live streams, and typically I only take into consideration what EA has confirmed. And when watching the live streams, I'm looking at the world, the architectural style of the builds, and of course the features. Again, that's pretty much no different from anybody else. Doing this helps me start formulating what stories could be told and how I can implement the features into the backstories of the new Sims. But we'll talk about that later. Most of my research is minimal. I'm not writing a thesis, so just some basic research. For the world, I like to look into the real world influences. For example, Mount Komorebi was inspired by Japan. So I spent some time learning about tatami mats and those types of things. I tried my best to make sure I have a basic understanding of the cultural represented in a Sims world. It's not conclusive, but to give me a baseline of things I may not know about. I also researched the architectural style of the world in the game, as well as its real-world counterpart. I want each lot to look like it belongs in the world. A lot of times when we learn about the architectural style of a particular world, I'll have one picture in my mind, and it will be completely different from EA's actual builds. For example, San Sequoia. Its architectural style is craftsman, but my idea of craftsman was a little more rustic and less contemporary to what was actually in the game. Usually that's pretty much all the kind of research I really do, and by this point I have a general idea of what a specific pack is going to be about, and I can start making notes so I won't forget a feature, which I still tend to do. And I spend the following weeks bouncing around ideas in my head about what stories would be interesting to play, and then comes the long wait for the pack to release. Once the pack is released, I typically avoid all Sims YouTube channels because I don't want to copy anyone or anything. I don't want something to seep into my subconscious while I'm planning and doing all of that. All of that happens up until I get the game. Once I get my hands on a pack, because sometimes I'm a little late to the party, the first thing I do is I go in to the new world and delete everything. Delete the Sims, the lot. I usually don't read the household descriptions. I don't really pay too much attention to the lots. I just go in, delete them, and be done with it. For the same reasons that I've already mentioned, once everything is deleted, then I take a screenshot of the world. I take that screenshot and put it into Microsoft Paint or GIMP, and I number each lot and make like a little map key detailing what lot type will go where. Here's an example of what that looks like with Chestnut Rib. Sometimes the lot types do change based on if I think something else better fits there or something like that. But I do try to include at least the newest lot type that came with the pack. Also, if you've noticed, I try to keep my community lots in one neighborhood and the rest of the lots are residential. I do this because it just feels more cohesive to me. Every now and then I'll have a residential lot in the city center, but I try to keep them separate. There's no real reason. It's a personal preference of mine. But anyway, so now that I have already planned out the residential lots and the community lots, now I know how many residential lots I'll have. So now I know how many households I'm going to have. And that's when I start writing backstories. I try to include as many feature-based elements as possible to the stories. What I usually do is I write the backstories in like a WordPad document or even a notes page on my computer. Also, with the backstories, I take note of all of the Sims' life stages in the household and later what lot they'll be living on, and try to build the house based on the Sims that are going to be living there. At this point, I don't have names for my Sims. Usually they're just adult male 1, adult female 1, and family name is usually in there in parentheses, so I know that I need to change that once I come up with a last name, because sometimes I don't have a name for my Sims. I have an entire backstory, an entire personality, but I don't have a name for them until I actually go into create a Sim and make them. With the backstories written, I now know how many Sims will be in a household and what life stages that they'll be. This isn't always the case, though. Sometimes I have a main character Sim who is the subject of the backstory, and the rest of the household are just supporting characters to help flesh out the story for one reason or another. And sometimes to fill out a particular lot. Kind of like Chestnut Ridge. I built all of the lots, and then there were a few households that are only going to have like 1 or 2 Sims in there, but they're going to have bigger houses, so I've got to make that work and make it make sense. This isn't really an exact science. It just depends on the stories and the Sims involved in that story. By this point, I have a general idea now of how many households and Sims I'll need to make, what community lots will be in the save, and now comes the fun part. It's finally time to start creating. I build everything in my build save. I'm sure many of you have a save dedicated to just building. I'm no different. I don't put anything in the save until I'm completely happy with everything. This way I don't have to revert back to a previous save. I tend to be indecisive, and what looked good on paper doesn't really translate too well in the game. If I build in my build save instead of the actual save, I can be 100%-ish sure that the lot that gets placed is the one that I really want. There are times I can build 4 or 5 shells until I settle on one. I usually save those shells so I can revisit them if needed. Chestnut Ridge and Tamarang are prime examples of this. I have built so many shells for this world. It's usually one lot that trips me up, though, so it's not too bad. When it comes to building, I approach it a couple different ways. Sometimes I'll concentrate on one build and not moving to another one until it's completed. More recently, I've been more likely to build out all of the shells first, bouncing around from one lot to another if I hit a creative wall. It makes the process move a bit better when you can come back with fresh eyes, and helps prevent building multiple shells only to settle on the first one. I usually leave decorating toward the end because at this point the Sims are just an idea on paper, so they're not real yet. And I try to decorate my houses based on the Sims that will be living there. I do this so it feels like they decorated the house to their preferences and not mine. I've only started doing this since we got likes and dislikes with, I think it was Dream Home Decorator. Before that, I still did something similar, but it was less involved. It was a general theme rather than a chosen color scheme or something like that. But with all of that being said, here's where I contradict myself just a little bit to say I also try to make the houses not so custom that they don't work with Sims that you may move into it. I also share an empty version of my save, so I have to keep that in mind as well. I have to keep a kind of a balance of specific to my Sims, but also neutral enough that any household can live there, if that makes sense. Once I have the shells of the houses built and floor planned, I start landscaping. I try to match the plants on the lots to those used in the surrounding area. I like my worlds to have a cohesive look. Landscaping and terrain painting are relaxing to me. I can just zone out and work on it. It helps me with thinking about how my Sims may look, or names, or whatever else. It may sound kind of weird, but it's almost like meditating for me. Everything has been built, floor planned, and landscape. It's time for Create a Sim. I spend more time in Create a Sim while creating for my save than I do when I'm actually playing my own personal game. I can spend hours and even days in Create a Sim, creating one household after the other. This part isn't the most exciting for me. I'd rather play the game than spend all my time in CAS. It's actually my least favorite part of the process, but also a very necessary one for obvious reasons. I typically have a general idea of what a sim should look like, so I randomize Sims, features, names, etc. until I get a base I can work with. There have been several times that the picture I have in my head looks nothing like the sim I've created, but I do tend to prefer the sim rather than my idea. Sometimes I go into CAS with nothing in my mind and just wing it until I find something that feels right. Other times, like with building, I make a sim, delete, make a sim, delete, over and over again. When this happens, I tend to just shut down the game and focus on something else. I try not to force myself to make a household because, more than likely, I won't be happy with the end result. When it comes to likes and dislikes, they're usually based on traits, aspirations, and backstories, and what color appears in their wardrobe the most. I typically choose 2 likes and 1 dislike. Outside of that, I like to let my Sims develop or discover new likes and dislikes through gameplay. So that's why I typically have 2 to 1, if you've ever wondered that. In addition to basing their wardrobe off of their favorite colors, I also use those colors in their house. Typically, whoever is like the main character, usually the house is decorated based off of their favorite colors. The reason why I do 2 likes and 1 dislike, specifically for colors, is I like to have a main favorite color and then an accent color. And it helps me kind of get out of my comfort zone to figure out a way that the 2 colors can coexist without looking tacky. Which this kind of helps explain maybe the red and purple likes from earlier videos, now that I think about it. As for the color dislikes, it's typically random. It boils down to which unselected color stands out to me the most, which explains all of the Sims disliking yellow for one, because yellow is a bright color. Again, this one's not an exact science either. The disliked are usually just kind of random. And actually, now that I think about it, most of the dislikes are kind of random. It's just kind of like the opposite of one of their likes, I guess. Music likes are similar. For children, I always give them the kids' radio like, because it's the only time, other than for childish Sims, that I get to use it. Also, I kind of like to have my child Sims develop their likes and dislikes as they grow up and age up, all of that. Which is why a lot of my teen Sims don't really like the kids' radio station. It's kind of a way for me to show that they've grown up and refuse anything childish. They think it's lame. So by the time they age up to a young adult, I take that dislike away and give them something else. For hobbies and skills and conversation topics and sim characteristics, it's pretty much the same as colors and music. These are based more on traits and aspirations and backstories than music or color likes and dislikes. I do try to keep the likes to similar categories though, like fitness and snowboarding or skiing, or painting and photography. So that is how I go about choosing my likes and dislikes. So after I have created a household, I save them to their library. I write with their backstories and hashtags, which I'll explain the whole hashtag thing later. I reset create a sim and do the whole process again until I've created every household based on the notes that I have. Once I have created all of the households, I move all of my new sims into the build save, and I cheat their careers and their skills. I don't cheat the relationships or money because none of those cheats transfer to the library. It'll always reset the relationships back to the default. I'm not sure that the money does that. So I set that and the relationships once the sims are placed in the save. Which brings me to the next step. So I've done the research, I've planned everything, the lots are built and decorated, and the sims have been created. Now it's time to move them all into the newest version of the save. Typically, I do a save as for the newest version. Whenever I start to move everything into the new version of the save, I start with the lots, of course. I use move objects to place every lot, because while I don't actually use the cheat while decorating the interior of the houses, on the exterior, with the exception of anything that Sims will be interacting with, I go crazy with move objects because I like having my plans overlap and stuff like that. I make it easy on myself and you by saving every lot with the original lot name as a hashtag. I do this so I can just search it by hashtag and not have to scroll through my entire library. I'll also use a hashtag for the world name as well. I can just search Chestnut Ridge or Brindleton Bay and find every lot that I have built. After all of the lots are placed, I start to move in the Sims, one household at a time. Similar to using hashtags for lots, I also use them for Sims as well. The only difference is I use the lot name that I used in the save, because sometimes I do change the lot name. To use Chestnut Ridge as an example, there's one lot, I think it's called the Rusty Horseshoe. Well, I changed the name to Appaloosa Homestead because I turned it into a residential lot instead of it being, I think it was a nightclub. Whenever I'm placing the households, while in each household, I fix the relationships and the money, because I do use the free real estate cheat as well to make sure that they can actually afford the house. Also, I set the beds in the house and lock the computers and fix the lighting as needed. I do that for every single household and make sure once all the lots are placed and all the Sims are in their houses, everything's fixed. I do go around from each household, kind of do a final check, make sure that nothing's missing, make sure that I didn't forget to fix their money, which I typically do. And that's it. It's finally done. I have created and updated the save, and I'm happy with the end results. Time to upload everything to the gallery for the console players. Also, for those of you who already have my save in your game, so you don't have to start over. I hope you enjoyed taking a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. Like I said earlier, I may do a mini series to kind of give you a more in-depth look. The only issue that I'm having is how I can make the research and planning parts interesting, because there's nothing in the game that I do other than take a screenshot, and the rest is done outside the game. I don't really start building anything until I know how many houses I need or how many lots that I need. Anyway, I guess that is all from me for now. If you like this video, give it a like. If you want to see more, subscribe, and I will talk to y'all later. Thanks for watching. Bye!